Friends, hello there. Welcome to part 3 in our series called Bread of Life. Oh my, I so hope you had a chance to watch last week's episode or to listen to it, because you're going to hear this week's reading differently if you had a chance to listen to last week's teaching. If you didn't, no worries. We'll help fill in the gaps. But we are going to dive right on in because we are continuing this series that's taking us through Lent up through Resurrection Sunday, or technically for us, the Tuesday after Resurrection Sunday, where we'll conclude this series. But we're looking at these stories of Jesus in connection to bread. And last week we looked at the story of the feeding of the 5,000, and we talked about how it shows up in all 4 Gospels. And today we're going to look at the feeding of the 4,000, and it actually only shows up in 2 of the biographies on the life of Jesus. And so Luke and John don't mention anything about it, but Matthew and Mark do. And you go, well, that's interesting. Well, just a reminder, each of the gospel writers, the biographies on the life of Jesus, they have an audience, and they're including certain stories for certain reasons, and they're connecting it through the rest of, the biography that they've written on the life of Jesus. And so this is not abnormal. What was abnormal is that this story of the feeding of the 5,000 happened in all 4 of the Gospels, and this is more like it. Most of the stories of Jesus end up, in 2 or 3. Generally, those are around the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And again, John is 90% new material, so generally the stories in John only show up in John. So there we go. Now, last week we read from Mark's rendition of the feeding of the 5,000. And just to keep some consistency between what Mark was doing, I'm going to read from Mark 8 today, knowing that we'll also pull in some pieces connected to Matthew chapter 15 a little bit later on. But Mark chapter 8, the feeding of the 4,000, goes like this. During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance. His disciples answered, but where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. Okay, let's just pause for a moment. Totally deja vu, right? Like, if you were just reading the feeding of the 5,000, and now you come to this feeding of the 4,000, you go, why are we recording another story that's just like the story before? Most of you know they did not have digital processing back in the ancient world. So when Matthew, Mark, Luke, John sit down to write the story of Jesus, they can't record everything that they want to. They have to be very, very selective. They don't have, a Microsoft Word document and they can do, 30,000 words. It's like, no, they have a limited amount of space. So why are they recording another story that's virtually identical? Why not just run with the feeding of the 5,000 and just let the story go? Use the story for space for something else. It's because the details are different. Notice what happens now. Verse 5, how many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7. They replied. Remember in the feeding of the 5,000, it was 5. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied, and afterward the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. Now, other gospel writers are going to tell us again, this was besides women and children. So again, we're dealing with 6, 7, 8, 9,000 people, but we're told 4,000, hence the feeding of the 4,000. All right, so here we go. Back on a map here. right? We've got Jesus and his disciples. Right after this, they're going to get back into a boat. This is happening again around the Sea of Galilee. We talked about how the feeding of the 5,000 took place somewhere up in this area, which was a very religious Jewish area. And now we have another story around the Sea of Galilee. Now, at this point in time, if you have been reading through Mark, you will already have some idea of where we're at, but I'm going to hold that for a few moments. And just as we did with the feeding of the 5,000, we began with the number of basketfuls. Because in next week's episode, Jesus is going to be talking with his disciples, and he is going to question them about how many basketfuls they picked up with the 5,000 and how many basketfuls they picked up with the 4,000. And so the numbers are really significant to Jesus. And in last week's episode, we talked about quantitative numbers, that these numbers are quantitative, that these are like actually 7 fish. But then there's a qualitative aspect to it. And I want to begin with the 7 loaves and the 7 basketfuls of broken pieces. So we're given this number 7 twice. Now, for those of you who hear the number 7, you will immediately go, well, this is the number for completion or perfection, if you will, right? 7 days to creation. And that's one of the ways the number 7 is used in the scriptures. But there is another association to the number 7, and we see this in Deuteronomy 7:1. It says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess and drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, try saying that 10 times fast, 7 nations larger and stronger than you, and then it goes on from there. So when Israel comes into the land, they're supposed to drive out the people, and Moses highlights that it is comprised of 7 nations. So in the land of Israel, 7 is a reference to the nations or to the Gentiles, non-Jewish people. You will also see this in Acts 13:19. Paul references this in his synagogue sermon in Pisidian Antioch. And he says, and he overthrew 7 nations in Canaan, giving their land to his people as their inheritance. Paul's talking about how God drove out these 7 nations. And so 7 is connected to the nations. Now, how many fish? It says a few. So how many is that? It's not 3. This is one of those things that's a little bit maddening in our English translation, is that the word that is used in the Greek means a small number, but undefined. It doesn't mean 3. For Mark, he doesn't care. This is why he doesn't tell us. He doesn't want to give us the number because the number doesn't have a qualitative aspect that's going to help solidify for us deeper understanding what's going on in the story. So this is why he says 7 loaves of bread and a few fish. And the word few for us in our English means 3, but it doesn't mean 3 in Greek. It actually just means a very small number. So Mark's like, it don't matter. Don't worry about it. All right. Now the location. Here we go. Now we need to be able to put some of these pieces together, because if the 7 is connected to the nations, the location here is really important, because we're reading from Mark, and we just read from Mark chapter 8, but this is the story that immediately precedes it, and this is Mark 7:31. It says, then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre, which was a very Gentile area, by the way, and went through Sidon, also a Gentile area, down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. That is a really significant word for us to understand, because it's referring to a region. So on the Sea of Galilee, the region of the Decapolis started about halfway through on the east side of the Sea of Galilee and went south. So this is the region of the Decapolis right here. Now, if we scale out and I show you the whole region of the Decapolis, this was a league of 10 cities. Deca, 10, polis, cities. A league of 10 cities. And there are a couple of different lists. At one point it swells to 18. But in Jesus' day, this is a pagan region that basically has to give, like, basically, how should I best say this, is that they're under control of Rome via Damascus. So what that means is that they basically report to the governor in Damascus, a Roman governor there. They don't really have any connection or relationship to the rest of the land. They're Greek or Roman independent city-states that are cities that are used to foster and promote Hellenism, which was the Greco-Roman way of doing things. Basically anti-Jewish. Very, very different than the Jewish world. And these were very strategic cities that protect Rome to the east and the Parthians, who were their arch nemesis that were off to the east. And so they held kind of like the eastern front, but they were also a region that promoted Hellenism. And this league was originally of 10 cities, appears to have been brought together around 63 BC under the Roman general Pompey when he came into the land. But in Jesus' day, it's still a fully functioning, Greco-Roman Hellenistic area, but it's also the area of where the pagans resided. It was the land of the driven out ones. Who are the driven out ones? This is comprised, the ancestors of these people are the ones who were pushed out by Joshua in the conquest. Now we know from reading it that Joshua and the people didn't push everybody out of the land, but they pushed a number of them off and they ended up taking up residence, and their ancestry was here on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. This is a Gentile area. And so on the heels of this, when it says in chapter 8, during those days another large crowd appeared, there was a large crowd before in the Decapolis when Jesus came across with the disciples in a boat, and then apparently Jesus comes back and there's a massive crowd there, and so we know that we are dealing with the Decapolis. And we don't know exactly where Cursi, here also known as Gergesa, here is part of the ruins today. Just further south of that is the ruins of Hippos, which is on top of here. And so here is some of the archaeological ruins. And as you get closer, you can see this. This is unbelievably sophisticated culture in every aspect of the word. Here's another Decapolis city known as Decapolis. It's connected to the ancient city of Beit Shean. But you can see here in this photo, this is a massive theater. These are people right here walking down the street. This is a massive, massive Decapolis city. And this is further south, by the way. It's kind of like down here. But as far as where Jesus is at, he is somewhere on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. And this is for the Gentile people, which is why I believe we also get one more number. How many people, we are told, that are men, so besides women and children? 4,000. In that we have 4. Just like we looked last week at, the 5 loaves of bread and the 5,000 men, and we talked about 5. Here we've got 4, and I believe this is intentional and significant for us to understand. Notice Isaiah 11:12. And he will lift up a standard for the nations and assemble the banished ones of Israel, and will gather the dispersed of Judah from the 4 corners of the earth. In ancient times, they talked about the entire world as being 4 segments or 4 quadrants, and to pull from the 4 corners was to essentially say to pull from the whole world. And who comprised the world? The nations, the Gentiles. This is exactly what's going on in Acts 10:11 with Peter when he gets this vision. It says, Peter, saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. And then God is going to talk about don't call the Gentiles like unwholesome. Don't keep them on the outside. My movement is for the Gentiles as well. And Peter really struggled with this because he believed that God's movement was for the Jewish people. And even though in Jesus' ministry, he's helping his disciples to see that his ministry is for both Jew and Gentile, Peter struggled with this and he gets this vision, and the four corners represent the four quadrants, which represent the Gentiles. It represents the world. And so in the 7 loaves of bread, in the 7 basketfuls, in the four corners, and here's one other fascinating detail, is that when we open up Mark, Jesus says they have been with me for 3 days. That is really significant. Because in Matthew's version, on the heels of this, Jesus is confronted by the Pharisees. And in the midst of the conversation, they want a sign. And Jesus says, a wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. Jesus then left them and went away. Now, the sign of Jonah shows up multiple times in the Gospels, and there's basically 2 different ways that Jesus uses it. One is in reference to how he's going to be, in the earth for 3 days. But the other way that he uses this is that 3 days and sign of Jonah are connected to each other. Because it was 3 days that Jonah was in the belly of the whale, and out of that he is preaching to Nineveh like the Gentile of Gentile areas, and the people repent. And it was understood to be the sign of Jonah when the pagans are repenting. So when Jesus is talking about 7 loaves of bread, or Mark records for us and Matthew records for us, 7 loaves of bread, 7 basketfuls, 4,000 people eat, 3 days, the sign of Jonah, all of this is in connection to the Gentile people. And Jesus is making a bold proclamation that he's not only providing for the Jews, as he does in the feeding of the 5,000, is that he is also providing for the Gentiles. And for those of you who watched our Christmas series, you will recall that in Matthew chapter 1, Jesus is a son of Abraham and a son of David. And the son of David, it was Jesus saying, I'm the fulfillment as the Messiah for the Davidic covenant for the Jews. And also as a son of Abraham, Jesus the Messiah was the fulfillment of the Abrahamic promise for all people. So friends, this is just another way that the gospel writers are helping us to see that Jesus' mission is both for the Jews and the Gentiles. And we see this in the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000 as Jesus, who is this bread of life. Now, I want to come back to this next week because the story that we're going to look at next week is Jesus pulling now on the details of both of these stories. But as a way for us to just take something out of this that I believe is challenging for me and challenging for you, here's what I want to just pitch to you as we conclude our time together. Is that on this hillside over here, Jesus fed 4,000 people. Somewhere along this coastline, maybe he's right here, maybe he's over on this hill, maybe he's on, to the left of the photo right here. But we have thousands and thousands and thousands of people who show up. And how long are they there for? 3 days. Now you go, well, where does this come from? Well, interestingly, in the Gospel of Mark, when Jesus shows up here, he has been here twice already. The first time he comes is in Mark 5, and Jesus heals the demoniac. Friends, that is taking place right here in the Decapolis. And the people are scared of Jesus. They don't know who he is, and they ask him to leave. Jesus comes back in Mark chapter 7, and now there is a large group that has appeared, not as large as what's going to appear in this feeding of the 4,000 plus women and children, but there's a large group here. And then here in Mark chapter 8, now we have more than 4,000 people who are willing to sit with Jesus for 3 full days. And you go, how did they get here? Well, at the end of the story in Mark 5 with the demoniac, Jesus tells him to go and tell his story. And it says he ran off in the Decapolis and began telling his story, which is its own teaching for another day. And I want to come back to Mark 5 and I want to do the demoniac. And I want you to see that story in its context. But this man told his story and all of these people showed up. And they sit for 3 full days, enamored at the words of Jesus. And here's the question that I want to ask us. Have we lost our awe of Jesus? That these people sat here for 3 full days. And it's like they didn't care that they hadn't eaten anything. It's like the words of Jesus were life to them, and they feasted on this opportunity to spend time with Jesus. And I wonder for some of us as we look into our own story and we struggle to ask the question about, is Jesus aware? Is Jesus present? Or maybe we feel distance or we're frustrated, is that relationships demand time. And I wonder for us, for those of us who may feel like our relationship with Jesus is fractured or we feel distant, is that we're just not spending time, that maybe we've lost our awe of Jesus, that we only come to Jesus with things that we need or in times of things that we're like, I need this or want this because this is what's going on. And it's like these people sat on a hillside, enamored with the teachings of Jesus, enamored with the presence of Jesus, and that's what was sustaining them. That was their bread of life. And so as we are moving through this Lenten season, as we are moving towards Resurrection Sunday, I wonder just for our takeaway today, or a takeaway for us, is just to ask ourselves the question, how do we regain our awe of Jesus? How can we be more intentional about sitting in the Word of God, to sitting in His teachings, of not just coming to Him with all the things that we need, but coming to Him because we simply want to be in His presence. And we want to, if you will, consume this bread of life, who wants to give us His words that just meet us in a place that fills us up. That we don't get fidgety after 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but that we sit in the presence of Jesus Christ and we allow His presence, we allow His Spirit, we allow His teachings to just enter deeply into us and do the nourishing work that it desires to do in our lives. So friends, I don't know how that hits you. I don't know what's resonating in your heart, but I believe that if we want to regain our awe of Jesus, that we need to spend time in His presence, to get excited again about what He did, what He does, what He is doing, and just allow Him to nourish us anew. So friends, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll have a number of additional questions at walkingthetext.com, so feel free to head over there. As always, feel free to leave your comments and your questions. I hope this has been helpful to you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And may you walk out the text well in your life.